I stepped into my backyard, expecting the peaceful silence of my suburban sanctuary, only to find pure chaos. Music blared at full volume, shaking my patio furniture. Strangers lounged in my chairs, beer bottles littered the deck, and the unmistakable smell of grilled meat filled the air. But what really made my blood pressure spike was the sight of at least 24 people splashing around in my pool, like they owned the place. And then I saw her, Karen, standing by the pool in a wide-brimmed sun hat, holding a cocktail, laughing like she had just won the lottery. She saw me, smirked, and lifted her glass in a mocking toast. "Oh, you're back early. I hope you don't mind, we're just having our annual HOA pool party." I blinked, trying to process the sheer audacity of the moment. My backyard, my pool, my property, and yet, here she was, acting as if she had sent out invitations with my name on them. "I don't remember agreeing to this," I said, my voice barely masking the rage bubbling inside me. "Oh, but you did," she said, her smile stretching wider. "I sent you an email about it. No response means yes, right?" I clenched my jaw, glancing around. Kids cannonballed into the water, soaking my brand-new outdoor cushions. A group of drunk middle-aged men laughed as they grilled on my barbecue. Someone had even moved my patio table, probably to make more space for the makeshift dance floor where an elderly couple was grooving to a remix of an 80s classic. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered. Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just one afternoon. Besides, you don't even use the pool that much." My fingers curled into fists. "That's not the point." She rolled her eyes. "Fine, if you're going to be a party pooper, at least be a good host. We're running low on drinks, maybe grab some from inside." I laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. It was the laugh of a man standing on the precipice of something unhinged, something dark. Karen, and this entire freeloading circus, had just declared war on me. I turned on my heel and walked inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded. My mind raced. I needed revenge. Not petty revenge. Not some weak slap on the wrist. I needed something they would never forget. And then, as if delivered by fate itself, my eyes landed on the television. A nature documentary played on the screen, featuring a group of massive, hungry alligators sunning themselves by a swamp. That's when the idea hit me. I was going to teach Karen and her entitled minions a lesson they would never forget. And it was going to involve a few unexpected guests in my pool. But first, I needed a plan. The next few hours, I sat in my office, digging through every possible legal angle I could use. I wasn't part of the HOA, which meant Karen had absolutely no authority over my property. Trespassing charges? A possibility. But no, I needed something bigger, something that would make them regret ever setting foot in my yard. Then, after a bit of research, I found exactly what I needed. There was an exotic animal rental service that specialized in educational demonstrations. They provided all sorts of creatures: snakes, lizards, even small alligators. My lips curled into a slow, devious grin. Oh, this was perfect. By the time I finished my calls, my plan was locked in place. I arranged for the delivery of several alligators to my home on the exact day of Karen's next little party. The best part? They weren't dangerous. These were trained, non-aggressive alligators used for demonstrations, but they were big enough to make anyone in that pool wish they had chosen a different backyard to invade. For the next few days, I acted completely normal around Karen. She, of course, had no idea what was coming. In fact, she was even more obnoxious than usual, making snide comments about how my backyard finally served a purpose, and how I should be grateful that she was bringing the community together. I gritted my teeth and smiled. Oh, she had no idea what was coming. When the weekend finally arrived, I made sure to be conveniently out of town again. I watched from my security cameras as Karen and her crew rolled in like they owned the place, setting up for another day of unauthorized partying. The audacity of this woman knew no bounds. This time, she had rented a margarita machine and even set up a makeshift DJ booth. I could hardly contain my excitement as the moment approached. Right on schedule, the animal rental truck pulled up in front of my house. A man in uniform got out and, after confirming my instructions, wheeled several large crates toward my backyard. And then, the magic happened. One by one, the alligators were released into the pool. For a few glorious minutes, everything was normal. The guests were too busy drinking and dancing to notice. And then, a teenage girl let out the most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard. "What the?" someone shouted. More screams followed. People scrambled away from the pool, slipping on the wet tile. Drinks were spilled, phones were dropped, shoes were abandoned as panic erupted like a volcano. And then came the best part. Karen, in all her arrogant glory, standing frozen with absolute horror as a massive alligator floated lazily past her margarita machine. The footage from my security cameras would later confirm it. The sheer terror on her face was priceless. She let out a shriek that could have shattered glass, clutching her sun hat like it was the only thing protecting her from death itself. "Jake! What the hell is this?" I strolled into my backyard, hands in my pockets, the perfect image of calm. Oh, did I forget to mention? I converted my pool into an alligator sanctuary. Totally legal. Hope you don't mind. Karen's face went through several shades of red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The party guests? They were already gone, running for their lives, trampling over each other, knocking over chairs, spilling drinks as they fled. A middle-aged man nearly dove headfirst into the fence in his panic. Karen was the last to move, still frozen in shock, as if her brain had short-circuited. "You can't do this!" she finally screamed, pointing at me with the fury of a woman who had just realized her reign of terror was over. "Oh, but I can," I said, holding up my phone. "Security cameras caught everything. Enjoy explaining to the police why you were trespassing on private property." Again. And just like that, the once mighty HOA queen had been dethroned. But this was just the beginning. Karen's screams still echoed in my ears long after she and her band of entitled party crashers had fled my backyard. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Watching her lose her mind over a few harmless alligators had been worth every second of planning. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to take embarrassment lightly. She would come back, and when she did, she would come back swinging. I needed to be ready. The first sign of retaliation came the next morning when I heard an aggressive knock at my door. I already knew who it was before I even checked the peephole. There she stood, red-faced and furious, a stack of papers clutched in her hand like they were divine law. Behind her, 2 other HOA members stood awkwardly, clearly dragged along for support but not nearly as invested in the battle. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, giving her my most casual smile. "Karen, to what do I owe the pleasure?" She shoved the papers in my face. "You violated multiple HOA regulations. Dangerous animals on the premises, public endangerment, illegal modifications to your backyard." I plucked the papers from her hands, glancing over them with mild amusement. "Karen, I'm not part of the HOA. Your rules don't apply to me. And as for public endangerment, well, I think that only applies when the people on my property are actually invited to be there, wouldn't you agree?" Her nostrils flared, and I swear for a moment I thought she might actually explode. One of the HOA members behind her coughed awkwardly. "Karen, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Greg," she snapped, keeping her glare locked onto me. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" I shrugged. "Not particularly. But I do enjoy teaching lessons to people who don't respect boundaries." Karen's hands trembled as she snatched the papers back from me. "You haven't seen the last of this. I will have you removed from this neighborhood if it's the last thing I do." I gave her a lazy salute as she stormed off, dragging her reluctant entourage behind her. I shut the door, exhaling slowly. She was rattled, but she wasn't done. Karen was a cockroach, Impossible to get rid of with one simple trick. She would be back, and I needed to be 2 steps ahead when she was. For the next few days, I went about my life as usual, keeping an eye out for any of Karen's inevitable schemes. She didn't disappoint. First came the fake noise complaint. I'd get notices on my door claiming I had been reported for excessive disturbances, even though I had barely played music above a whisper. Then came the parking violations, tickets mysteriously appearing on my car despite the fact that I was parked in my own damn driveway. It was all petty, predictable, and honestly kind of pathetic. Then, she made her real move. I came home one afternoon to find a letter in my mailbox, not from the HOA, but from a lawyer. It was a formal complaint, claiming that my reckless endangerment had caused emotional trauma to multiple HOA members. She was actually threatening to sue me. I laughed. Out loud. Standing in my driveway, letter in hand, I laughed so hard I had to brace myself against my car. She was truly insane if she thought this was going to go anywhere. Still, I wasn't about to let her think she had any power over me. So, I did what any rational person would do. I fought fire with gasoline. I called up a lawyer friend of mine, explained the situation, and within 24 hours, Karen received a legal notice of her own. My claim? Trespassing, property damage, and unauthorized use of personal asset. I included a nice little demand for reimbursement for the damages caused by her illegal pool party. The next morning, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Apparently, Karen had gathered her minions for an emergency HOA meeting, trying to rally support for her case. But the problem was, Karen had underestimated just how many people she had pissed off over the years. Sure, some loyalists backed her, but others? They saw an opportunity. One neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, chimed in the chat, reminding everyone how Karen had fined her $200 last year because her front door was the wrong shade of beige. Another neighbor mentioned how Karen had nearly caused a man to lose his job by reporting his home business for zoning violations that didn't actually exist. It was a mutiny in the making. By the time I stepped outside to check my mail, I spotted Karen speed-walking toward me, her face twisted with rage. "You think you can turn this neighborhood against me?" she spat. I folded my arms, enjoying the sight of her unraveling. "I think you did that all by yourself, Karen." Her hands balled into fists. "You don't belong here. You don't respect the community, the rules." "You mean your rules? The ones that only seem to apply when they benefit you?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Face it, Karen. The only reason you have any power is because people are too scared to stand up to you. But guess what? I'm not." Her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and plastered on a fake smile. "You'll regret this," she whispered before stomping away. I did regret one thing, that I hadn't bought popcorn for this. The fallout happened quicker than even I anticipated. Over the next few days, the anti-Karen movement gained momentum. More people shared their horror stories. Someone dug up financial inconsistencies in the HOA's budget under Karen's leadership. Where exactly were all those hefty fines going? Then, the breaking point came. An anonymous tip, not me, but let's just say I might have encouraged it, led to an official HOA audit. Suddenly, Karen had bigger problems than me. She had to explain why thousands of dollars in HOA fees had been spent on things like community improvement projects that didn't seem to exist. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, it wasn't Karen standing at the head of the table. It was an interim president, a mild-mannered guy named Dave who seemed equal parts terrified and relieved to be there. Karen had been forcibly removed from her position. I would have loved to say she took it gracefully, but that would be a lie. She screamed. She threatened lawsuits. She called everyone in the room a bunch of ungrateful idiots before storming out. And just like that, the queen had fallen. I watched it all unfold from my front porch, sipping a cold beer as I listened to the neighborhood gossiping. Someone suggested throwing a celebration party. Someone else volunteered their backyard. Then someone else, jokingly, suggested my pool. I raised my beer and laughed. Only if you don't mind the alligators. The joke landed, but the message was clear. This was my house, my property, and no one, not even Karen, was ever going to take it from me again. The neighborhood felt different in the days after Karen's downfall. There was a noticeable lightness in the air, a shared sense of relief among the homeowners who had spent years under her oppressive rule. People who once avoided eye contact now exchanged friendly nods. Kids played in front yards without fear of being reprimanded for unauthorized sidewalk chalk art. Even the HOA board, now under new leadership, seemed determined to run things fairly. For the first time since I had moved in, I actually felt like I belonged. But deep down, I knew it was too good to last. Karen wasn't the type to slink away quietly. She had been publicly humiliated, stripped of her power, and exposed as the fraud she was. A woman like her wouldn't accept defeat so easily. She would be back, and when she returned, she would be more dangerous than ever. I didn't have to wait long to be proven right. It started with small, almost comical attempts at revenge. My trash cans mysteriously went missing on garbage day. My mail was suddenly misdelivered to random addresses across the neighborhood. A complaint was filed against me for excessive lawn watering, which was ironic considering I hadn't touched my sprinklers in weeks. It was obvious Karen was behind it, but these were minor inconveniences at best. Annoying, but nothing I couldn't handle. Then she escalated. One evening, I returned home to find a notice taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was another one of her fake citations, but as I read the words, my stomach tightened. Zoning violation. Unauthorized commercial activity on residential property. I blinked at the notice, then read it again. What commercial activity? I didn't run a business. I didn't even sell things online. But as I looked closer, I saw Karen's fingerprints all over it. There, in the complaint details, was a claim that I had been renting out my property for private events, including wildlife demonstrations involving dangerous animals. I actually laughed out loud. She was trying to use the alligators against me. The next morning, I marched straight to City Hall, notice in hand, ready to clear up the misunderstanding. The clerk barely glanced at the paper before shaking her head. We've been getting a lot of these lately. HOA disputes mostly. Looks like someone's trying to weaponize local ordinances. Let me guess, I said deadpan. A woman named Karen? Her side told me everything I needed to know. It took a few hours, but I managed to get the violation dismissed. As expected, there was no actual evidence of me running a business. Still, the fact that Karen had gone this far meant one thing: she was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Later that evening, I sat on my porch, sipping a beer, waiting. If I knew Karen, she wasn't done yet. She had thrown everything at me, and nothing had stuck. That meant she had only one move left: another unauthorized pool party. And sure enough, just after sunset, cars started pulling up. I watched in amused silence as people sneaked into my backyard, whispering and giggling like teenagers breaking into a theme park after hours. I spotted familiar faces from the previous party, including the same group of middle-aged dads who had commandeered my grill last time. Then I saw her. Karen. She strolled in like she was the guest of honor, dressed in a ridiculous flowing swimsuit cover-up, sunglasses perched on her head even though it was dark. She carried a drink in one hand, phone in the other, like she was documenting her triumphant return. I could almost hear her thoughts. She had convinced herself that I was powerless, that no matter how many times I chased her off, she would always come back. That's what made this so satisfying. I stood up, stretched, and casually made my way to the side gate. As I swung it open, every head turned in my direction. Someone yelped. A guy holding a beer nearly dropped his cup. Karen froze, mid-sip, her face draining of color. Well, 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 I said, stepping forward. Look what we have here. Another unauthorized gathering. Seems like someone didn't learn their lesson the first time. She straightened, composing herself. "Oh, relax," she said, forcing a laugh. "It's just a few people having fun. No harm, no foul." I tilted my head. "No harm, huh?" I gestured to the pool. "So, if I were to call the cops right now and show them footage of a bunch of people trespassing on private property, you'd be totally fine with that?" A nervous murmur ran through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Karen scoffed. "You wouldn't dare." I smiled, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my phone. "Wouldn't I?" I tapped the screen, and suddenly, a bright security floodlight snapped on, illuminating the entire backyard. Simultaneously, a voice echoed from my phone's speaker. "This property is under surveillance. You are trespassing. Law enforcement has been notified. Please vacate immediately." I had pre-recorded the message earlier, just for this moment. Panic erupted. People scrambled, knocking over chairs, spilling drinks, tripping over each other in their haste to get out. One guy dove straight through a bush in his desperation to escape. Karen's smug facade shattered. "You can't do this," she shrieked. I took a step closer, lowering my voice just enough for only her to hear. "I already did. And here's the best part. I didn't actually call the cops. But do you know who might? Your new HOA president." Her mouth opened, then closed. I leaned in. "Dave saw the security footage from last time. He knows everything. And he's very interested in how you keep trespassing onto private property. Seems like a real liability issue for the HOA, don't you think?" Her face twisted in rage. "This isn't over," she hissed. I smiled. "Oh, I think it is." With that, I turned and walked back into my house, leaving her standing there, seething. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the new HOA board. In it was a formal apology, an assurance that Karen would be permanently banned from any future board positions, and confirmation that she was being fined for her actions. As I scrolled through the rest of my messages, I noticed something even better. The neighborhood group chat was buzzing with gossip. Someone had uploaded a video of Karen's latest failed party, complete with the security announcement and her frantic attempt to salvage her dignity. The comments were brutal. By the afternoon, she had deleted her profile from the group chat entirely. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and enjoyed the peaceful silence of my backyard. My backyard, free from unwanted guests, unauthorized parties, and the reign of Karen. For the first time since I had moved in, I felt like I had truly won. The fallout from Karen's last failed stunt was glorious to watch. For the first time since moving in, I wasn't the one dodging complaints or dealing with petty retaliation. The tables had officially turned, and the neighborhood wasn't just watching, they were celebrating. The HOA board, now under actual leadership instead of Karen's dictatorship, had put their foot down. She was fined for trespassing, unauthorized use of property, and even violation of noise ordinances, considering the chaos she had brought to my backyard. It was a beautiful thing. But Karen wasn't one to go down without a fight. Even after getting hit with fines and effectively being blacklisted from any leadership position in the HOA, she wasn't ready to admit defeat. The problem with people like her was that they didn't just want power, they needed it. Without it, they lost any sense of purpose. And a Karen without power was a Karen desperate enough to do something truly unhinged. I didn't have to wait long. It started with whispers in the group chat. People mentioning that Karen was suddenly talking about reforming the HOA, as if she was some kind of fallen leader planning a grand comeback. She started making rounds, knocking on doors, trying to rally support from the few people who were still loyal to her. The issue was, those numbers were dwindling fast. She had overplayed her hand too many times, and people weren't buying into her theatrics anymore. Then, she tried a new angle. A few days later, I got an official-looking letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was another one of her fake violations, but when I read the contents, I actually laughed out loud. It was a petition to remove me from the neighborhood. The reason? creating a hostile living environment through intimidation, harassment, and the use of dangerous wildlife. I could almost hear her furious typing as I read it. She had twisted the entire situation, making it sound like I was the menace. Not the woman who had repeatedly trespassed on private property, not the person who had stolen an entire backyard for unauthorized parties. No, apparently, the real villain here was the guy who dared to say no to her nonsense. I walked over to my neighbor, a guy named Tom who had lived there for over a decade. "Did you get one of these?" I asked, holding up the letter. Tom took one look at it and burst out laughing. "Oh yeah. Straight into the trash." That seemed to be the general consensus. Karen's attempt to rally the neighborhood against me was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of seeing me as a problem, people saw the letter for what it was, a last, desperate attempt to regain control. And then came the final nail in the coffin. 2 nights later, a massive thunderstorm rolled in. Heavy rain, lightning, the whole deal. I was sitting inside, enjoying the show, when I noticed movement on my security cameras. At first, I thought it was just someone running to their car to avoid getting drenched, but then I saw who it was. Karen. Sneaking through my yard. I sat up, watching in disbelief. What the hell was she doing? This woman had already gotten into enough trouble, and now she was breaking into my property in the middle of a storm? I pulled up the camera feed on my phone, zooming in. She was carrying something, several somethings. Plastic bags. And then I saw what was in them. Trash. She was dumping garbage into my pool. For a second I was too stunned to react. This wasn't just a petty prank. This was deliberate vandalism. She had waited for the storm, probably hoping the rain would wash away the evidence. Unfortunately for her, she had forgotten one small detail. My security cameras had night vision. I didn't even bother going outside. I simply sat back, enjoyed my drink, and watched as she sloshed through my yard, tossing bag after bag of trash into the water. She thought she was getting away with it, but she had no idea she was putting on a live performance. The next morning, I woke up early and walked outside to inspect the damage. Sure enough, my pool was a mess. Floating plastic, food waste, even a couple of soggy HOA newsletters. Probably Karen's way of making a statement. But the best part? She had left behind a very specific piece of evidence. One of the bags had ripped open during her stormy adventure, and sitting right there on my patio was a discarded envelope with her name on it. You couldn't make this stuff up. I took my time, collected all the trash, snapped photos of everything, and then walked straight to my lawyer's office. By noon, Karen received an official police report. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, the neighborhood group chat was buzzing. People were furious. This wasn't just another case of Karen being annoying, this was criminal. The HOA board issued an emergency statement, formally distancing themselves from her actions. By evening, I got another email. Karen had been served with a restraining order. She was banned from coming within 100 feet of my property. That should have been the end of it. But Karen had one last trick up her sleeve. That night, as I sat outside, enjoying the newfound peace of my yard, a moving truck pulled up in front of her house. At first, I thought she was finally moving out. But no. Instead of packing up, she started unloading. Boxes. Furniture. Old decorations. She was preparing for something. The next morning, my neighbor Tom walked over, shaking his head. "You see what she's doing? Trying to pretend she's not about to be run out of the neighborhood? I guess." Tom chuckled. "Nah, she's planning a party." I frowned. "What?" "Yep. Huge event. Invited everyone she could. Guess she's trying to prove she's still queen of the HOA, even though she's not on the board anymore." I sighed, rubbing my temples. Of course. One last desperate attempt at holding on to whatever power she thought she had left. That night, as Karen's party got into full swing, I noticed something hilarious. No one showed up. Oh, there were a handful of loyalists, sure. But for the most part, the neighborhood had spoken. Karen had pushed too far, burned too many bridges, and now she was completely alone. I watched from my porch as she tried to pretend it didn't bother her. She smiled, laughed too loudly, overcompensated with exaggerated gestures. But every now and then, she'd glance at her phone, probably checking for texts that would never come. The reign of Karen was officially over. I turned, walked back inside, and finally felt at peace. The silence in the neighborhood was a different kind of silence. Not the uneasy hush that came when people feared their HOA dictator lurking around the corner, ready to hand out ridiculous fines for leaving a trash bin out an extra minute past collection time. No, this was the kind of silence that came with relief. The air was lighter. People were no longer walking on eggshells. The absence of Karen's daily interference was something that everyone noticed but no one openly acknowledged. It was as if the neighborhood had gone through a collective detox, cleansing itself of years of control, passive-aggressive emails, and unwarranted citations. It had been a few days since her last, desperate attempt at throwing a party, and something about that night had broken her. Maybe it was the way her invitations had been ignored. Maybe it was the sight of her standing in her driveway afterward, watching the last of her few remaining allies leave without a second thought. Or maybe it was the realization that no matter how hard she tried to claw her way back into a position of power, no one was interested in giving it to her. She was no longer a leader, no longer feared, no longer relevant. The morning after her failed event, I sat on my porch, drinking my coffee, when I saw something that nearly made me spit out my drink. A "for sale" sign had been planted in her yard. It stood there, proud and unbothered, a final nail in the coffin of Karen's reign. She was leaving. She had finally accepted that she had lost. The news spread fast. The neighborhood chat was alive with people cautiously celebrating, not wanting to jinx it. Some speculated she was just doing it out of spite, that she'd pull the listing at the last second just to mess with everyone. Others swore they saw real estate agents walking through the property, meaning she was serious. Either way, it felt like the finish line was in sight. I didn't have much time to dwell on it before my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Dave, the new HOA president, stood there with a hesitant smile. "Got a minute?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside so he could come in. He looked around like he expected Karen to pop out from behind my couch, ready to hit him with an obscure violation about indoor decorations not being HOA approved. Once he realized my house was a safe zone, he relaxed. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "For standing up to her. For dealing with her crap. A lot of us wanted to, but, well, you saw how she was." I nodded, understanding what he meant. Karen thrived on intimidation. She counted on people being too exhausted to fight back. That was her power, making the battle seem too difficult to win. "She would have kept going if you hadn't shut her down," he continued. "Now, people are actually willing to speak up. It's a different place already." I waved off his gratitude, but I couldn't deny that it felt good to hear. I hadn't planned on becoming some sort of neighborhood hero, I just wanted my damn backyard back. But knowing that my battle had given others the courage to stand up for themselves made it even sweeter. As Dave left, I glanced over at Karen's house. The sign was still there, untouched. The countdown had begun. The next few weeks were quiet, peaceful. For the first time, I could actually enjoy my home without fearing that someone would be throwing an unauthorized party in my backyard or reporting me for breathing too loudly. Karen kept a low profile, barely seen outside. If I had to guess, she was either packing or planning her next move in some other unsuspecting community. Then, one evening, as I was grilling on my patio, I saw her. She stood in her yard, staring at the "for sale" sign, arms crossed. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her posture. The rage, the bitterness, the unwillingness to accept that this was really happening. For so long, this place had been her kingdom. And now, she was being forced to leave it behind, not because she wanted to, but because she had been pushed out. For a brief second, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Then, as if sensing my eyes on her, she turned, locking eyes with me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched, heavy with everything that had happened. Then, finally she spoke. "You think you won," she said, voice sharp. I tilted my head. "I don't have to think it. I know it." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She was holding back a storm of words, probably wanting to scream at me about how unfair it all was, how I was the villain, how this wasn't supposed to be how things ended for her. But there was nothing left for her to say. No audience left to listen. No board members to back her up. No power left to wield. Instead of arguing, she scoffed, turned on her heel, and stormed back inside. The door slammed behind her, a final act of defiance. A week later, the moving trucks arrived. The neighborhood gathered, casually pretending to be going about their day, but all very much invested in watching Karen's departure. Some whispered to each other, some exchanged knowing looks, but no one dared to say anything directly to her. This was her moment of defeat, and everyone wanted to see it. As the last of her furniture was loaded up, she climbed into her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. For one last moment, she looked at her house, her kingdom that had crumbled beneath her. Then, without a word, she drove away. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, the first cheer rang out. Then another. And another. Before long, the entire block was alive with relief. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne. A neighbor set up a grill. People gathered, laughing, celebrating. It wasn't planned, but it didn't have to be. Karen was gone. As I stood in my backyard, watching my neighbors come together for the first time in years, I realized something. This wasn't just about me winning against one entitled HOA dictator. This was about an entire community reclaiming its peace. Tom raised a beer in my direction. "You know, you should throw a pool party," he joked. I smirked. "Maybe. But only if everyone signs a waiver acknowledging they might have to share it with alligators." Laughter rippled through the crowd. For the first time since moving here, I felt at home. And this time, there was no Karen to ruin it.